yes, all right, it's not as good as going on a 3-day hostage survival training course in your where you study in the freezing cold room, but it's better than a couple of hours of briefing and reading a couple of news articles.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Training and development for hostile environments. Today, we're delighted to be speaking with Peter Moore, one of the long-standing contributors to the Circuit magazine and, of course, the Circuit in general. But actually, today, something a little bit special. We have a guest editor in Chuck Randolph, all the way from Conversations in Close Protection. We're delighted to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, mate. I'm doing well. It's good to catch up with you. And of course, I'm always happy to lend my support to whatever question or whatever thoughts that you send my way. But I'm doing well, thanks.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on. I've actually seen the second half of Conversation in Close Protection in the States just recently. Mr. Chris Story very kindly attended our Phoenix event.
The ubiquitous Mr. Chris Story.
Don't you put a new sentence in front of his name each time, don't you?
I do, and the secret is, and I'm sure most of your listeners probably may know this, is whatever I put in as the colorful adjective for him of the week, most of the time has a very subtle string to what I think the theme of the show is that week. So it makes it sound like I spend far more time thinking about it, but yes, and people have asked Phelim for either a coffee mug or a T-shirt that has all the adjectives that I've used for him over the last 5 years that we've been recording.
I love it. Well, let me have a go. I'm probably going to fall flat on my face, but it's lovely to have the virtuous Chuck Randolph.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And that's my very sore and badly worded attempt at blending with today's topic, because, and we've been very lucky to have Peter Moore on in person and virtually. Absolutely. And on the magazine. He's previously spoken about his experience, his testimony, his advice, but he has been working on training and development for hostile environments and specifically kidnap situations through a virtual reality platform. Obviously, that a little bit more accessible than some of the more miserable kidnap and ransom training out there. Where do you think we can go with today's session?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting, because if you think about Peter's, tragic adventure, if you'll allow me that, you have an IT expert. He spent a very long time as a captor in Iraq. His 4 bodyguards were assaulted. I think he was the only one that survived. And, and he's talked about it on your show before. He's talked about it on the circuit. But who better to come out with and say, like we as security professionals or security practitioners, Phelim, maybe we came from the military or from law enforcement, and we've done maybe some harder skilled training around escape and evasion. But if you think about it from a corporate standpoint, I'm really looking forward to hearing Peter's point of view as a former IT person that says, hey, look, I've been to these hostile environments. I'm not maybe the same as my security provider. How should I think about things like situational awareness? How should I think about things like the environment? How do I think about, also discerning this to other engineers or IT people that might go out there, or executives who might be traveling alone and need to understand this is kind of what the expectations are.
Yeah, and that's important, because we focus on skill sets for the protector, and we know protectors love upskilling. They're very motivated. But what about training the protectee, the principal? Because I suppose this is where such a metaverse or virtual environment might be more suitable to them, because if you put your principal through some of the more miserable training, they may never go anywhere ever.
Sure. And I mean, first, you got to think of logistics. I mean, just to get an executive that is going to say, let's call it the miserable training or the hard training. I'm thinking of like escape and evasion training, some things that maybe I've gone through before in past lives. That's a commitment of time. Just to say, hey, Phelim, you're the CEO of Phelim Row Inc. Sir, can you come and spend 4 days in a crappy environment to kind of learn. Even if you're interested in it, chances are time is money, and that's not going to happen. But to be able to do it in snippets and have a virtual environment that executives can go and say, this is what I learned, this is what I think you should learn and what you should be aware of, I think is a really fascinating idea.
And as an idea, I think we're more receptive to it, because maybe 5 years ago you'd say virtual reality, and people have maybe visions of 1980s arcade games with triangles, and I don't know what. I'm just plucking at straws here. But do you think the protector community is ready for all things VR, or do you think there's a bit of hesitancy?
Well, Phil, I'm like you. We're both fans of the media as well. And you think about COVID and how that COVID exacerbated a lot of things. Some of them were accelerations in technology. You look at some of the way some like TV and media things are produced. They have this VR wall now. And I think whether we're ready for it or not, the technology is there that is going to allow us to be more immersive. Now, look, I'm very clear to say, being in a virtual metaverse with an Oculus on my head that says I'm in the jungle is not the same as being in the jungle. I think you and I both totally understand that. But being able to say, here are some of the sensory things that you're going to experience or you might experience, to help point out things like situational awareness. We often know in the first 30 to 90 seconds of an issue, there's opportunity maybe to escape, or and these are ways that we can instruct and teach both protectors and protectees.
Fascinating. Well, yeah, I'm all for it, and please, answers on a postcard, fan mail if you think this is going too far into the world of the future, but I'm very much looking forward to it. So let's listen now to Peter Moore and explore hostile environment training and virtual reality.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
When things go wrong, hostage survival training for protectors. I'm here with Peter Moore, long-standing contributor to the Circuit magazine, former hostage and IT consultant. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing good. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very grateful.
Well, it's great to engage with you in this sort of more immersive format. I often like to say bringing the pages of the magazine to life. We know there's a lot of protectors out there on the move, and they do like, of course, to read your articles, but also hear from you directly. So let's spark their interest. Hostage survival training. What's the problem that we're trying to solve beyond the obvious?
I think the perception of people when they're working in hostile environments, and certainly this was my perception, is that when you get taken hostage, that's it. You're going to die. End of. And actually, that's not true. I now know, and I now see that you can do a lot of things to tilt the balance of survival in your favor. And in my case, I was held for over 2.5 years. But while you might be held a long time, you can still make your conditions better. So just because you've been taken hostage does not mean it's going to end badly. There are a lot of things you can do to aid your survival.
And that, whilst of course stark, is a more positive outcome, I suppose, than otherwise. We'll get right into that, but let's explore, because of course you are a former hostage. So why is this now a passion of yours to sort of mitigate this for others?
Okay, so when I got captured, I was working in Iraq in the Ministry of Finance back in 2007. And I was a computer programmer. To be honest, at the back of my mind, I never thought I would really be at risk of capture. I thought as a programmer, I'm not really high profile enough. However, as part of my job, I had 4 British security guards with me. And I was captured along with those guards. All of these British guards were ex-military. Some had only been out maybe 1 or 2 months. They still had a valid military ID card with them, in fact, when they got captured. Over time, these security guards got killed, and the militia that held me captured 2 American soldiers. They got killed also. I was actually the only one that got out alive out of the whole of the group. So I was the least trained, had no military background, and I survived it. And the military people that were military trained did not. And when I got released, that's what sparked my drive as to why did I, Peter Moore programmer, survive when the others did not. Statistically, that sort of should not have happened. So that was really my drive of how I started getting involved with things. And then from that, I started to move more into this military training program of conduct after capture. And then from there, that sort of moved into the civilian sector. And now, ironically, one of the things I'm trying to do is implement a virtual reality training simulation for hostage survival. I've been working on that with the Danish military for a couple of years now, and I'm trying to work on that now.
And that's very, very topical, because our readers and listeners will undoubtedly remember you from some very in-depth articles. And of course, you very kindly spoke at the Inspiring Individuals event we did with the support of Ivor Terrett last year. And so they might think, I know your story, and it's very important to know your story, and very, very, very great to have you on. But I think this is perhaps the nugget for today's podcast, in that training and the combination with technology, and everyone talks about metaverse, but virtual reality, immersive learning, I think that's what's going to hold people's interest for this podcast. So what should the completely uninitiated protector know? Because I have visions of them saying, oh, that's some future technology, nothing for right now.
No, this is something, this is something that is here and now. It's just not mainstream. So right now, I have a working prototype in virtual reality for conduct after capture, which has been shown to a number of military units, and some of them have been actively involved in developing it further. And right now, with the Ukraine situation, there's been a little bit more of a drive, shall we say, to try and implement more fast track kind of conduct after capture training. So that's happened like in the last week, sort of thing. So I don't have anything else to add to that, because it's still a bit ongoing.
Ongoing, but I suppose increasingly accessible. So let's then expand this, because in a way, a protector may, I'm not putting thoughts into their mind, words into their mouth, they may say, I don't really want to touch this topic because it would indicate I've failed. It would indicate that I may have lost my principal. They've been captured. I've been captured. Something's been captured. And in a way, that's not a risk management approach, is it? You're not planning for contingencies. How should they grapple with this topic and, in a way, sell the topic? Because it sounds dangerous from a career perspective, perhaps.
Sure. So to start with, there is a bit of a flow, like a pipeline. So initially, when you get captured, the first thing that your people need to understand, they need to recognize that capture, because there is something worse than being captured. And that's not recognizing that you've been outnumbered, trying to fight, getting injured, and still being captured, because then your situation is way worse. Okay, so that's the very first thing I want to sort of point out. You need to recognize the capture is happening, and you're not going to be able to overpower it. So you have to sort of go with the flow at that point. In my case, I was sort of surrounded by 5 people pointing guns at me. And I remember saying to my security team leader, who was sort of next to me, I said, what do I do? Now, in my mind, I was thinking my security team were going to do some sort of Jean-Claude Van Damme kung fu type thing to get me out. And they said, just do whatever they say. And actually, that was the right advice. But at the time, I remember thinking, is that it? Is that the best advice you can give? But that was the correct advice at that time. If we'd tried to fight, we would have been killed instantly. We were surrounded by like 10, 20 people with guns pointed at us. There's no way we would have got out of that. However, once you're in that situation and you recognize you've been captured, yes, escape is an option. And when they talk about escape, they say do it as early as possible to that point of capture. It's the most chaotic time, but it's very, very risky. The reality is, once they've captured you, you're probably blindfolded, could be handcuffed. They may strip you of clothes. That's what they did with me. So there's not a lot you can do. You have to just go with it. Ultimately, you're trying to build a rapport. You're trying to generate a rapport with your captors, point out that you're a human being, you have family, you have a dog, whatever. Try and get some sort of alignment with them. You could be with them for a very long time. You may not like them. You may not want to be with them. You wouldn't choose to be in that situation. But I always say none of those factors mean that you can't do it. Okay, just because you don't like it, wouldn't choose it, don't want to do it, doesn't mean you physically can't do it. And in reality, I think the insurance industry, when they talk about kidnap and ransom insurance, they say recovery rates are 95% of people get out alive. And while there might be some industry spin on that, I think that is genuinely true. Most people do get out alive from hostage situations. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get out well, and doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get out quick, but you do get out alive.
And that's perhaps the more positive message, because I could imagine if I was a protector and I had to prepare my principal in a few seconds, as you say, for it. Obviously, that's a non-optimum time, right? And it's a non-optimum amount of time. So ideally, they would have undergone some training before. And yeah, if you do explain it to them in those terms, maybe you could get them interested in training, without scaring them, without them thinking, hang on, is this the best protector for me, given that they're now talking about failure? If you talk to them in those terms, perhaps you'll get them interested in training.
Sure. I think putting it as failure is probably a little bit incorrect. At the end of the day, it's a risk, isn't it? You know, we're at risk of capture all the time. You could go down to the ATM down the street, get smacked on the top of the head and be taken hostage for your money. It could happen, but it's risk, isn't it? What is the calculated risk of that? If you are working in hostile environments, I always say to the non-security personnel, people like me, the principal, I always say to them, look, you know, the reality is we do this job because we want to do something different. If we wanted a really safe job, we could just go and work in an office 9 to 5. You know, we are choosing not to do that. We are choosing to put ourselves in these risky situations. So yes, there is a risk of hostage. There's a risk of a car breakdown. There's a risk of getting dehydrated. They're all risks, and you have to cover for all of those risks. If you're working in the desert, you could die of dehydration. And your principal wouldn't be surprised that you're talking about that. So I think talking about being kidnapped as a risk and talking about it in this way is a good way of doing it. You know, there are some very extreme hostage survival training courses where you're kind of put in a freezing cold room, you get water poured over your head, you're shouted at and all this sort of stuff. Personally, I don't think there's too much value in that. You know, I've never been in a car crash, but I know that a car crash is probably a bad thing to be in. So do you really need to expose somebody to those type of events to prove to them that being taken hostage is a bad thing to happen? You know, we know it's a bad thing. So do we have to expose ourselves to it? Just by talking about it like this and preparing them for it, explaining them the sort of dynamics of the country that they're working in, that helps a lot. And how to speak to people certainly in developing countries. So I'd learned from working historically before I was kidnapped that the sort of conversations you have are based around family, things like that. Whereas in the UK, my first question might be to you, what job do you do? Whereas in sort of more developing countries, my opening question would be saying, are you married? Do you have children? How old are your children? And these are kind of opening conversations. So even though you're being kidnapped, there's no reason for you to have, you know, you may as well have that conversation. It might make life a bit easier for you.
That's very important. And those cultural nuances, you've got to really pick up on them, because you might be seething with anger still, and you've got to think about negotiation in a way. But going back, you mentioned the more miserable side of the spectrum, and people who have been in government or forces and what have you, you know, they do have tales of just how miserable and degrading that is, right? And nobody would want that. But maybe that really aggressive treatment is designed to try and stop them revealing information. So they have to work out how not to give information at all costs, including their own demise. But for your average protector, an average CEO or principal, that's not going to be such a driving factor. So maybe for the more civilian world, could you paint a picture of the spectrum of the types of training out there, all the way to what you're working on now?
Sure. So I just want to point something out about that, what you've said there about holding back information. So although as a civilian, even me getting captured in Iraq, I was just a civilian programmer. I mean, I had no national secrets or anything. In the spectrum, they have two types of questioning. There's kind of like this initial questioning, which are things like, what's your name, where you're from, what are you doing, that sort of thing. And then they have these secondary questions, the follow-up questions, which are more in depth. Now, as a civilian, you might think, well, I've got nothing to hide. When I got captured, I was terrified. The first person I saw, the first captor who spoke to me and asked me my name, I just told this person everything I knew, because I wasn't military. I'd got no secrets. I told them what I was doing. They didn't ask for any of this information. I just told them everything I knew. And I remember thinking, that's it. I've done my bit. 2 days later, they came back to further interrogate me. I had nothing else to say. They thought I was hiding something. I got really harsh treatment for that. And that was the mistake. So even though you are a civilian, I think the rules are just answer the questions they ask and drip feed the information. Don't just blurt everything out like I did, because they will come back. They will check on that information. They will come back. They will ask you follow-up questions. If you've told them everything at the start and you have nothing else to say, it will just look strange. It looks suspicious. It's exactly, imagine meeting someone in a coffee shop who you get on with really well. You meet them for the first time. They talk about their whole life, everything. They tell you everything there is to know. And you arrange to meet up the following week. You meet them the following week and you say to them things like, how's your week? And they say to you, well, I told you last week how it was going to be. And it's a bit like, oh, okay. What coffee do you want? And they're like, well, you know what coffee I want. I told you. So it's a very different dynamic the second time they ask you those questions.
That is a good point. And yeah, and on reflection, I was wrong for skirting over it just as a given. That is a really important point, because whilst you're not sort of going to the very end without revealing something top secret, it's not that. It's the becoming a motor mouth under heat can cause you problems. Anyway,
Yes.
because we're focused on training to avoid said complications. What's the spectrum of the, shall we say, not so miserable and maybe more productive training, going all the way to what you're working on now?
Sure. So I think the sort of the first line of training that people should do is the hostile environment training. So that's before being kidnapped. This is about working in hostile environments, what to do in the event of a breakdown, being aware of your surroundings, checking in with using various radio codes, that sort of thing. The advantage of that kind of training is it's about avoidance. And your best security personnel are the ones that see a problem and go the other way. In my mind, again, before I was taken hostage, my security team were like Rambo. That's how I perceived it. So if there was a fight over there, they would engage that fight, they would deal with it, whatever, right? I now know that's not the type of security person I want around me. I want a security person that says, there's a fight going on over there near the entrance. That's the building we've got to go in. So we are going to go in the opposite direction for now, and we'll check back again in 15 minutes. That's the security person I want, who avoids it. And hostile environment training prepares you for that. It prepares you to observe, prepares you to train for things. The biggest thing that I've learned from all of this, if you go out on the road and something looks wrong, it's because it's wrong. Okay, it's not because of any other reason. It's not right because it's wrong. And that's the red flag that you need to turn back. The mistake I made with my security team was we were briefed by our management who said, security teams, the security guards are in charge of security. My job is to sit in the car, let them do the security, don't talk to them, don't engage with them. This is a mistake. Security is everyone's issue. I remember when we drove out of the green zone in Baghdad, I saw a lot of police officers, a lot of Iraqi police officers, an abnormal amount of Iraqi police officers. I didn't say anything. The security team didn't say anything. I thought the security team had seen it, just ignored it. The reality is, after we got captured by fake police officers, they said to me, "Did you see all those police officers outside the green zone?" I said, "Yes, I did, but you didn't say anything, so I didn't say anything." So the reality is, if we'd have said something at that point and said, "That's strange, let's turn back," we probably would have never been taken hostage. But as a business, you can't say you can't measure that. You can only measure the failure. You can't measure that success. So so sort of deviating a little bit, but back to the training. Hostile environment training, definitely the first stage is what you want to do. And that's practical, but it's nice practical. It's where you have a bit of a briefing. Let's say you have a briefing about the car breaking down, something like that. You will then go out into the forest where there's a broken down car and you'll practice it. And it's very nice. The next step of hostage survival training is you get the briefings. So they're generally country specific. So if somebody knows they're going to work in, Malawi, for example, they will get a country briefing on Malawi and what the risks are associated with kidnap, what is likely to happen if you're kidnapped in that country, what historical events say, and then how to deal with it. So more like in a discussion like we're having now. Usually that takes 2-3 hours, something like that. You might get a presentation, that sort of thing. The next sort of level up from that is more hands-on. So this is where you'll have a briefing, but then potentially someone will come in the room. They might blindfold you, handcuff you, take you out of the room, see how you react to it. But only for a few minutes, only for a short time, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then they'll take the handcuffs off, they'll take the blindfold off. You sit around, you discuss it, and then you go through it again. You try and go through it again. So the theory of that is the more you do it, the better your response to it. It's a technique called stress inoculation. So if you present it, if you expose someone to something consistently enough and long enough, it becomes the norm. They don't get stressed over it. So that's kind of the next step. And then the real extreme is more what the military do. As I said before, that's where you're kind of captured, walking over a hill, you're thrown in the back of a truck, blindfolded, handcuffed, put in a freezing cold room, water poured over your head, all that sort of stuff. And that thing can last, 2 days sort of thing. As I say, I'm personally not in favor of that. Certainly for the civilian sector, I think it's a very extreme form of training. But that's my opinion.
Yeah. And it might make sense if you've got something so important as information that you absolutely, for the goodness of all mankind, that I can kind of feature. But in our EP world, I'm not sure that's you. Or at least I hope it's not you. And so where does virtual reality come in? Because VR, I've seen some fantastic VR apps. I've experimented with the Google Cardboard VR player with your phone. It's very affordable. Can you paint a picture of your VR work?
So the advantage of my VR system is that it can be used in two ways. One, to expose people to being kidnapped without actually being kidnapped. So effectively, you go through this briefing for half a day, and then you put the VR on, and then you expose yourself to being kidnapped. So you get an idea of what it's like. The second thing it can be used for is testing. So in the military, they do these one-day training courses. They have various levels of this sort of hostage survival training. So at the first and second level, we can use the VR to test the knowledge of the person who's been through the course. So that's that. But moving forward, what we're trying to do now is implement what the military term resistance to interrogation. So using the VR, we can actually track your eye positioning. So by getting the VR, the avatar in the VR to ask you a question under interrogation, we can detect your eye position, and then the avatar can respond as to whether that is being a deceptive answer or not. So that's sort of the next step that we're dealing with.
And that's quite interesting, because I suppose, you know, some people train for those eye signals and those facial signals, and
Sure.
And in the popular press, we hear a lot about, oh, this company will learn if you are enjoying their advert from whatever eye movement in the metaverse or whatever, right? So, but what can we break it down? Why is that important? Because I feel that that's innately translatable outside of the virtual world.
Sure, it is. But it's useful for training people. So at the end of the day, if you want to give a deceptive answer that's believed to be realistic, you need to know where to eye position. So, and again, as a civilian, you might think this is not required. Well, I would have said the same thing. I would have said, when you're taken hostage, the best policy is to tell the truth. It is. That is what the book says. If you're taken hostage, tell the truth. Someone stuffs a gun in your face and says to you, tell me your religion. That's not the time to start promoting your atheist beliefs, okay? So you have to give a convincing answer about your religion. I hardly ever go to church, but I had to think very damn quick about my religion. I'm not going to tell them I don't have any religion. This person's like going to shoot me. So I'm not thinking what is the correct answer or the truthful answer. I'm thinking, what is the answer I need to give to keep myself alive? And in that particular case, just for information, people might be interested in what the answer is. I'm just like everyone else. I don't really go to church, but you know, I don't work Christmas, I don't work Easter, I take New Year's holiday off. Well, they're religious holidays, so therefore I'm religious, and that's what I said. I said, well, I don't go to church, but I don't work on these religious holidays, and that's it. You know, that is it. You know, that and most people are like that. As you know, I've met people that I've spoke to about being kidnapped, and they've said they have no religion whatsoever. And my question is, do you work Christmas Day? No, they don't. Well, you're religious then, aren't you? so that you know, you've got to kind of think about it in that way a bit. So although the eye tracking, so back to the eye tracking. So although what we're trying to train them to do is use their eyes to give a believable answer.
And is that, I read in some book of marketing guru of some sort, you look down, you're feeling, you look up, you're thinking, you look left, it's imagined, you look right, it's remembered, or is that what we're talking about?
Exactly. So if you're looking down, that's more deceptive. If you're looking up to the right, that's a memory recall. That means you did it. You're recalling an event. So whether or not your interrogator believes that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you believe that or not. Just by that process of looking up to the right, trying to make out you're doing a memory recall, if nothing else, it's giving you time to think of an answer. So you're putting in almost a pause there under interrogation. It's hard to do. It's difficult to do. But, you know, and any trained interrogators listening on here will know that I've completely simplified that, and they'll be like, well, it's way harder than that.
No, but I mean, of course, but that's a good point, because when we did a segment on self-defense, and you know, you're not frequently trained, shall we say, anything that requires more than one move is probably going to be counterproductive. So if someone said, you know, to get out of this bear hug, whatever, you got to do this with your arms, this with your legs, this with your stance, this with this. They said anything more than one move and you're in trouble. And the one move is generally run. So perhaps this is comparable, because any more, you know, for the generalist, any more specialist facial expressions might just not look the part. But I like that. Look up to the right, or however you're instructed.
Yeah, it does work. There are theories out there. You know, there's like anything. There's theories for it and theories against it. I just wanted to add something, actually. We talked about the metaverse, and much further down the line with the virtual reality, what we'll be able to do is emulate like a group hostage situation. So where you've been captured as part of a group. So me and you, we're sat in different places right now. We put the headsets on, we're in a room together, and then we're in a group hostage situation. So we could do that from anywhere around the world. People all over the world could put the headsets on, and we've all been captured in a room. And then interrogation comes in, and people get asked different questions or that sort of thing. Because once you get into group dynamics, your answers to the questions change significantly. For example, myself and Phelan, we're sat in our room with our VR headsets on. Someone walks in, our captor walks in and says, "Who's in charge?" I'm immediately going to say that Phelan's in charge. I'm going to put the pressure on him. I'm not in charge. I know nothing. I'm only here because Phelan's here. He's the man you want to speak to. So with that group dynamic, you can really create those kind of pressures. So.
And I can see how sort of almost peer review then comes in, because afterwards someone say, "I can't believe you did that or didn't do that," or so on. Yeah. But I mean, how does that work then? Because a group exercise. I think I've done another session on wargaming and so on. Do you think sometimes people get an unrealistic expectation, like you had an opportunity to become Rambo and club the person over the head and beat up everybody? I can't believe you didn't be Rambo.
Yeah,
is that possible?
I suppose it could be possible, but one of the very specific remits that I've made in this VR, because obviously I'm dealing with other programmers now. So I'm dealing with gaming programmers predominantly now. And the problem with gaming is that it puts the success in the player's favor. Okay. So if you're playing a game of escaping from a room, ultimately you'll escape from a room because the computer game is designed for the player to succeed. What I need to be sure of when we're dealing with these hostile in training environments is the environment's not configured, if you like, to give the success to the wearer. So when we talk about escape, like the Rambo thing, yes, somebody could pick up a bar, and yes, somebody could hit that one person in the room over their head. But at the moment they do that, another 5 people are going to walk in with guns at that point, and therefore you're not going to be able to get away. You might get away with it one time, but you won't get away with it constantly. And ultimately, of course, as the very extreme, within the hostile survival training VR that I've got, the very extreme result is you are taken out and get executed. So that can happen in VR as well. So we can always end the VR in that way if the person really doesn't want to comply.
That is, that's important, and it's important to draw a distinction between a game and this, because you're not seeking to win,
right?
You're seeking to prepare and improve. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right. So you're preparing them for survival, aren't you? You're preparing them to get through it, sort of thing, as opposed to fight it. I mean, we've talked about this before, gamification. I mean, there is gamification there, but it's not a game, as you say.
And yeah, that's perhaps key, because, and actually maybe that's key because let's imagine an employer has sent you on said training. The immediate instinct of an employer is: did you get a gold star? Did you get a certificate? Did you pass? Did you beat up your captors? I mean, I can imagine all sorts of weird questions. Whereas that's not the right question, which is a bit unsettling for any employer spending money on training, because they want to see a bit of an outcome. And in this case, they really shouldn't see the outcome.
No, the outcome should be that you went there, answered the questions, did not a lot, and you got out okay. That really should be the outcome. You did what you were sold. But but yeah, there is a way of grading this as well. So there are marks. So if you give a positive response to a situation, you can get a higher mark. So we can actually give it a pass or fail kind of grade, although it's built in, but we're not using it at the moment. It was designed because it was designed for military. Certain military units train to pass or fail. Certain military units don't. Certain military units more like this flow, follow this pipe.
More like an experience when you see police in certain non-UK, shall we say, jurisdictions. They taser each other, and they say, you now know what it's like. Yes. Whether that's, can't really comment.
I mean, it's extreme training, isn't it? I guess the advantage of that extreme training is you remember it.
Yeah.
I think that's probably it. I think,
and you don't panic because you're like, oh well, it hurt, and
sure.
But and a similar sort of thing. I know it's an interview for you, but I was in DC with a group just a week ago. I went to the International Spy Museum. Very, very recommended, right? It's very immersive and quite tasteful, if stark at times. And they did have a bit on, quite nasty techniques, and they did explain that some people go through them so that they panic less.
Yes, yeah. That's the idea. Is you're able to cope with it. You're not as stressed when it happens. So yeah, but again, I would reiterate. We're working in these hostile environments. It's a risk. I think, to be fair, my risk is probably a little bit different to some of your close protection people, because I'm going to dangerous countries. I'm exposing myself to that. Whereas I suspect some of your close protection people that are quite famous, and so they're at a different type of risk, aren't they? They're getting swamped by people that, I don't know, probably want to get their autograph or kill them. I don't know. There's quite an extreme range of people there, I would think.
So moving forward, let's say an EP specialist wants training such as this. Is it sort of something for their CV, or is it like more fitness where they just need to be fit? Because people do an off-qual in medical X, Y, and Z, or maybe leadership training or covert surveillance, and they have that certificate and things like that. For this, what should they consider doing?
I think they need to do it because they are at risk. From my perspective, again, as a principal, I always thought, well, I've got a security team. If things go wrong, my security team will sort things out. I never envisaged in a million years that the security team would end up in the same bad position that I'm in. I thought historically, if I was at risk of being kidnapped, the security team would intervene to stop me from being kidnapped. I never thought about the security team being kidnapped as well as me. So the same thing applies to your EP personnel, in that, yeah, okay, they might not be targeting that security person. They might be targeting your principal, but they're going to take you hostage also, which I never thought of. Could never occurred to me that would happen. So it's important that they're trained also in this hostage survival training, because it could happen to them.
And just practically, what does that look like? Does that look like they go on a couple of weeks and then they get a passing grade and that's something for their CV? Is it something longer, something they do in night school? What should that look like?
Yeah, so generally you'd go away for a couple of days to do it. Usually it forms part of hostile environment training. And they would then be captured, and then they'd be held and questioned and things like that. They would go through this pipeline to ultimately being released. So it normally takes a couple of days. You get a certificate at the end of it. What they do say is, though, once you've done it, you don't really need to do it again. You just need to sort of recap on things, maybe read news articles and that sort of thing, which is quite interesting that they say that. Even the military say that. They say once you've done that training once, you don't do it again. You just sort of do a bit of a refresher. So it's a couple of days worth of training. Like I say, some people do like a one-day briefing sort of in their own office and that sort of thing. But I think a bit of practical is important.
And let's say you're an EP specialist, you've listened to our interview all the way through, and you say, "Oh, I still have no faith in this newfangled VR technology." I suppose if you've been in the military, you've probably used a J dome for training. You've done things like that, but let's say they're still unconvinced that VR is possible. What would you sort of say to them?
Well, I think it falls in the middle ground. It's accessible, it's cost effective, it's easy to do. It can be brought to you in an office where you can do it. Yes, all right, it's not as good as going on a 3-day hostage survival training course where you study in the freezing cold room, but it's better than a couple of hours of briefing and reading a couple of news articles. You know what I mean? So it kind of falls somewhere in the middle. It's cost effective, really. Like I say, we can bring it to you. We can immerse you in any environment. So whether it's a desert, forest, town, whatever, we can change that environment.
So they don't need to bring their own Oculus Rift or whatever. No,
not necessarily. No, we provide them currently. So yeah.
Okay. Well, that's positive. Well, I'm glad we went down this angle because, metaverse VR is topical. There is a debate about it currently about all sorts of aspects of it. So it's really a great pleasure to have you on and look at this. And I know you've spoken about it before, and I know you've told people a lot about your experiences and your advice, and that's immensely valuable because with each passing year, there's a new cadre of EP specialists coming in. But this is something for them and for the more long-standing professional who will, of course, know you and have heard you speak or read your articles before. But what's next for you, Peter?
Well, next for me is, ironically, I start back work next week, so I'm teaching computing at a college, so that's the immediate thing. But further down the line is I'm hoping to get this VR for conduct after capture actually embedded in the military conduct after capture program. And that I'm hoping to have that embedded within the next few months in one unit, I should say.
Well, best of luck with that. I think with that, everything will cascade, and perhaps mass adoption will break out.
I hope so. Yeah, you might see me at one of your events, demonstrating it.
Absolutely. Well, we got lots coming up. We've got a meetup by the International Security Expo, and then we've got some more events, including the CP Tech Forum in January. So maybe it'll be ready for then. You never know.
Maybe.
Well, Peter, thanks very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you, and I've really enjoyed bringing the pages of the Circuit magazine to life.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Peter Moore, for once again knocking it out of the park and helping us along a journey, looking at how we can all develop a hostile area surveillance training and of course, K&R awareness. I'm back with the immutable Chuck Randolph. You'll see where I'll go with the word immutable in a bit. Mm-hmm. And what did you take away from today's session?
Well, I think my big takeaway is, Philip, if we have an ultra high net worth individual, that training that we might want to get that person, their family, that might be very boutique. It might be very customized. That, there's a lot with that. But for the large swath of protectors and protectees, principals, executives, some who may not have protectors with them, or again, Peter himself was an IT professional, or engineers who are traveling around maybe to look at oil rigs or whatever, the ability to get some of this training in a hybrid fashion, I really think is the way forward. Because again, before we went into the interview, we talked about, look, there's some opportunities at the very beginning of an incident to maybe gain a foothold, to escape, evade, etc., whatever cool words we want to use. But without any training, you have zero ability to use it as part of your critical thinking skills in the moment. So when I listen and I think about, that's really what was running around in my mind, is like, is it necessary? And I understand why people might criticize it, but I think it's a fascinating way to approach and get awareness out to that larger level of executives and people who need it. And then the protectors getting it, understand when we walk into a situation, I understand what training you've had, Phelim. So now I know how to brief you before the detail. I know how to approach you. And all of a sudden we're on the same sheet of music when it comes to incident management in the moment, if you will.
And that same sheet approach, I think, will be invaluable for the operation, because you wouldn't want your principal going off trying to be Rambo because they hadn't really gelled with what your mission was. You want to be on the same sheet.
Phelim, you make a great point. If my only awareness to any of this has been, as Chris' story might say, watching John Wick or something, and I think, well, I don't know what else to do, so my knee-jerk reaction is to do that, which, reality is something vastly different. I think it kind of rests my case on that. Like, this training is great for setting that baseline, which causes discussions and follow-on discussions, et cetera, as opposed to, hey, we're going to throw you in a box, run around, let you escape, slap you around the head a couple times, and then say, there you go. What have you learned? Well, it hurts to get slapped in the face.
Yeah, and if you're not doing like kickboxing training and whatever, it's not the same thing. It's not a game, which is another one of the things that I thought was really good from today's session, because there's a place for win-lose games, I suppose. Yeah. But this is awareness training. You're not going to be like, you did X, Y, and Z with the kidnappers, and therefore you've won. It's much more, how can we calm you down and let you think rationally, in a very stressful environment.
Yeah, those critical thinking skills that this type of training brings, I think, is very important, because, again, often in the moment, like, just understanding, like, my stress level is going to be high. I think we can agree, and the ability to calm one's down and say, what did I learn? What do I know? Okay, let's start thinking about that. Let's start, and at some point, how do we trade that mindset from the immediate to the long term? I think there's a place for it, and I think his approach is fascinating.
I like it. And one more thing I liked about it, which I think would be a massive takeaway: don't spill all the beans immediately, he said, because
yes.
Then you have no more beans to spill, and they think something fishy is going on. So actually, to be fair, I don't know how I'd get that right. I'd probably just, spill all the beans.
You got to think. I mean, it's a resource discussion for the good guys and the bad guys. And you're right. I mean, the minute you're not a resource, or the minute maybe it isn't perceived that you're going to gain resources, what are you? You're a resource drag. So that means there's going to be some interesting questions on the bad guy side. So excellent point to highlight.
Yeah, very tricky. But on a happier note, what's coming up? What's coming up for you, Chuck?
Oh my gosh, Phelim, so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you over in the UK later this fall for the conference. Of course, we're looking forward to the Close Protection Conference that the IPSB is doing. The conversations of close protection. Phelim, who knew that we'd still be going strong after 5 years, and we still have yet to not find somebody that has a great story and a great conversation. I feel grateful every day to get up, and I'm excited about the folks in the industry, and I'm glad that people like you and I and Chris have venues and ways that we can help spread the wealth and spread the story. So,
well, I'm grateful for the cross-pollination, cross-collaboration, and support, and it is inspirational what you're doing, and I'm very, very eager to keep listening, because I do enjoy your format. I try and, with the team, with John and Sean and Elijah, I try and bring a thematic form to what we're doing, whereas what you are doing is a little bit longer form, and it's more in-depth in some areas, and it's more a sort of an expose, and I think that those two approaches complement each other quite nicely.
Well, there's a lot of things that are vying for your attention. There's a lot of great podcasts out there. There's a lot of, there's many ways that you can up your education. If you're not a cyber person, there's places you can go and start to listen and understand. If you're not a business person, same thing. And, I love the fact that there are both long and short form. Sometimes I would like to do more short form, but it ends up being long form. Perhaps that's just because Chris and I are long-winded. But I love it. And there's so many different types of formats and so many different ways we can ingest it. So, in some ways, it's the best of times to be a protector in terms of development.
Absolutely. And I'm really finding a lot of people willing to share their advice and, bring up the new generation as well.
Absolutely. And it wasn't always that way. And you and I both have experienced those times. So it's great that so many people pay it forward.
Yes. I'll just leave it with the word yes. Also coming up, for our colleagues in the UK, 27th of September, we're doing a Circuit Magazine meetup alongside the International Security Expo in London by Kensington Olympia. That will be 4 p.m. onwards at the same venue as we had last time, but we will send you more details. And of course, there's the EP World coming up in November. And then the IPSB conference in Vegas in December.
7 to 9 December this year. We might change the dates again next year, but yeah, it's 7 to 9 in Vegas this year. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Perfect. And then I'm looking forward to hosting you on the 26th of January for the 8th Annual Executive Security Close Protection Technology Forum. What a mouthful.
Awesome. That is going to be a great time. And I'm really looking forward to getting back over the pond. So many friends that I haven't seen thanks to COVID that I'm ready to go and enjoy a G&T, if I can say that.
Oh, you can. And it's to be appreciated. Well, lovely to have you on. Thanks for being a guest editor this week. Great that we've tied it into Peter Moore, who I know you know and we know. So it's great to cross collaborate across the digital divide. You see, I got to say it. All right.
Awesome.
Well, Chuck, thanks very much for coming on. And this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.